Good morning, everyone. And good morning to those of you who are joining us on the live stream. It's wonderful to see everyone. We do these Amram Scholar Series once a month, and clearly we hit a chord in the email we sent. Thank you to Jen Millstone for sending, but she and I were speaking and thought, you know, this really, we know exactly who we want to make sure has this on their radar, and so clearly this is where we are. So I'm gonna start by, I'll introduce myself for those of you who might not know me, or if you're watching on the live stream. I'm Rabbi Sue Schenkman, and it gives me great pride to welcome everyone to the Washington Hebrew Congregation's Amram Scholar Series. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our Amram Scholar Series. This morning is also sponsored by our Edlovich-Tizer Family Relations Forum, which some of you may remember from when our kids were younger. There were a lot of programs for parents. So I'll tell you a little bit about both of those groups before I introduce our speaker. The Amram Scholar Series offers a stimulating program of free lectures throughout the year in which world-renowned speakers, authors, scholars, political leaders, policy analysts, and theologians share their perspectives on timely issues or their research into history. The program traces its beginnings to the fall of 1954 when WHC moved to our Macomb Street home. That fall, participating in a nationwide celebration marking the 300th anniversary of Jewish settlement in the United States, Washington Hebrew launched what would become this widely recognized Sunday morning lecture program. This morning's program is also sponsored by the Edlovich-Tizer Family Relations Forum, addressing issues confronting 21st century families. Today's families face new and growing challenges, and the programs and speakers sponsored by the Edlovich-Tizer Family Relations Forum strive to address these needs and provide information, education, guidance, and support. In addition, we are grateful to the Jewish Book Council for their partnership with today's lecture, and also want to remind you that following our program, you'll be able to purchase the book, Aging with a Plan, and you'll also be able to have it signed by the author. And I can vouch for the fact that this is a wonderful resource and will continue to be a wonderful resource in lots of ways, but I'll let her speak about that. So we invite you to stick around for a few minutes after to have that opportunity, and if you have children in religious school, you'll be done in time to pick them up if they're in this building. And if you need to go early to get to the other building, you'll be able to have the fullness of the program before you leave. So Professor Sharona Hoffman is the Edgar A. Hahn Professor of Law, Professor of Bioethics, and co-director of the Law Medicine Center at Case Western Reserve University. She received her BA from Wellesley College, her JD from Harvard Law School, an LLM in Health Law from the University of Houston, and an SJD in Health Law from Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Dr. Hoffman has written over 70 journal articles and book chapters on health law and civil rights topics, as well as 2 books. She has received numerous awards for her teaching and scholarship, including the 2021 Case Western Reserve University Faculty Distinguished Research Award. She has spent 2 sabbatical semesters as a visiting scholar at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and 1 at the National Institutes of Health Bioethics Department. Professor Hoffman has lectured nationally and internationally and has made frequent appearances in the media. And she has a website which is easy to find at sharonahoffman.com, where you can find more information, but she's going to share a tremendous amount of information this morning. I do want to just frame this and think about the context in which we're talking about this topic. We are in a point in the Jewish calendar known as the counting of the Omer. It's the 7 weeks from Passover, from Pesach, to Shavuot. And it's 7 weeks, and on the 50th day, we celebrate the festival of Shavuot, which has agricultural roots, but we celebrate it as the giving of the Ten Commandments and the Torah. In ancient times, it was a time period when each day there would be an offering brought, the Omer, a barley offering, wheat. And I don't know, I did make the mistake the other day. There was one person who happened to be sitting next to me who is actually a farmer or has a farm. But we don't have those kinds of offerings today. We're not occupied in quite the same way. So how do we give that offering? How do we make sure, in most time periods, we count down, whether it's to a special date. We'll take a day away each time, 6 days until an installation or something like that. Or if you have a birthday coming up, it's a countdown. But in the Omer period, we count up. We count the 7 weeks, counting each day, adding. And the rabbis asked, why do we do it in this way? And the suggestion was that it's because we need to be intentional about what we're doing. We make each day count. And often, for those of us sitting in this room, many of us are occupied with doing things for others, for family members, for making sure that children, parents, that perhaps grandchildren have what they need, and thinking about what others need. Today is really about making each day count for us. I think it's important for us to take the time and be intentional in how we care for ourselves in order to be able to care for others. And that is in part what this morning is about. And so I thank you for being here. And I also want to say at the outset that we're going to hear a lot of wonderful resources and get a lot of wonderful information. And we'll be able to stay connected as well with Dr. Hoffman. And most importantly, we're going to be able to continue this conversation between and among ourselves, to remember that part of being part of this community and a congregation is to be able to have that support as we go through all the phases of life, and to be able to look at not just the people in this room, but others who may be joining us on the live stream, and know that we have that community of support. Whatever we might be facing, it's going to be different for each of us, but we can share, as they say, we can share the oys and the joys, and really be a sacred community for each other. So with no further ado, I am really, really proud and thrilled to welcome Dr. Sharona Hoffman. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I thought I would start with a little bit about why I wrote the book, and then we would get into the substance of it. So the book, accompanied by music, okay. The book grew out of a very difficult period in my life. During 18 months in 2013 and 2014, both of my parents died. My father was a rabbi. My mother was an Israeli pioneer. My mother-in-law died, and my husband, Andy, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at the age of 55. So as I went through all of this, I learned a lot about getting older and having all sorts of difficulties, getting older, getting sick, facing the end of life, and doing a lot of caregiving. Now, I am a professor of law and bioethics, so I knew something about the doctrine and theory of a lot of the challenges that I was facing. But there's nothing like personal experience to really enliven that knowledge and drive those lessons home. I also realized that as difficult as things were for our parents, they would probably be more difficult for Andy and for me, because we don't have any children. We don't have anyone who is going to become a natural unpaid caregiver. And so it's all the more important for us to do some planning and put some safeguards in place. And of course, COVID-19 taught us that life is completely unpredictable, and you might not have as much time as you think to do that planning. So the book is, first of all, my effort to deal with my own anxieties and try to find some answers for myself. But more importantly, it's an effort to put my professional and personal experiences to good use, helping others. And actually, the first edition came out in 2015. This is a fully updated and revised second edition that came out in 2022. So it is a concise but comprehensive resource that is a one-stop shopping opportunity for aging issues. It combines a whole lot of research with personal anecdotes. It's part memoir. I had a lot of stories to work with. And it also offers an abundance of practical advice. Every chapter ends with a checklist of takeaway messages. So it's meant to be an accessible resource for anyone who is or will be aging or caregiving, which is pretty much everyone. So I wanted to start by just saying a few words about each of the chapters, giving you a little outline of the book, because those are sort of the highlights of what I think are important issues for aging. And now we're going to test this out. Aha, okay. So I start with money matters because money is relevant to everything else, and I will talk more about that. The benefits of community living. So a lot of people want to age in place, to stay in the home that they have had for years or decades and not have to transition. And that can be a fine choice for some people, but only if the home, first of all, is going to be safe, if you don't have a lot of falling hazards there, and also if you are still going to be able to be socially and intellectually engaged. And what happens to a lot of people as they age is they become isolated. Their friends can't come visit them anymore or are gone. They can't drive. They don't have a lot of activities. And we know that loneliness and a loss of a sense of purpose has very, very adverse effects on both mental and physical health. So for a lot of people, it's a very good idea to actually think about a retirement community of some sort. And this chapter talks about all sorts of options, 55+ housing, continuing care, retirement communities, other sorts of arrangements that are all worth looking into. So what if you are going to be like me and you're not going to have a lot of people that will naturally help you with finances and medical care and things around the house? So this chapter talks about daily money managers, geriatric care managers, relocation experts if you are going to make that move, home organizers, and others. What are these service professionals and how can you retain them? Essential legal planning. I'm a law professor. We're going to talk a lot about that. Driving while elderly. So driving is a very sensitive topic in a lot of families. It certainly was in mine. And the truth is that if you have to not drive so much anymore or not drive at all, you lose some of your autonomy. And so how do you identify people who may not be safe drivers anymore? And how do you approach conversations that are probably going to be very fraught about limiting or stopping driving? And how do you avoid some of the mistakes that I might have witnessed or even been a part of? Now, today we're lucky. There's Uber, there's Lyft, there's a service called Go Grandparent where you don't have to fiddle with your phone. You just call a number like you used to and they'll dispatch a ride to you. So there are options, and I talk all about that in this chapter. Care coordination, treating the patient, not diseases. That's about how to get the most out of your medical care. I'll get into that. Long-term care, that's nursing home, assisted living, in-home care where an aide comes to the house. What are these options? How do you figure out what's the best fit for you or your loved one? And finally, exit strategies, maintaining control at the end of life. So this is about end-of-life decision-making, talks about all sorts of approaches, hospice, palliative care, medical aid in dying, which I think you have in DC, right? And other things that are important to know in order to try to manage this very difficult time as best you can. So I like facts and figures. I thought I'd share a few with you. So in 2022, we had 56 million seniors, people 65 and older, and that was 17% of the population. In 2035, it's estimated that we will have 77 million seniors, and that will be 21% of the population. In 2020, we also had 6.7 million people who were 85 and older. That's considered the very elderly, and a lot of them still drive. Now, one thing that is happening is the baby boomers began turning 65 in 2011, and baby boomers are defined as people born between 1946 and 1964. Now, when I saw this figure, I actually became a little upset. I always thought I was a member of Generation X or Y or one of those cool generations. I'm the very last year of the baby boomers. Now I have to say we baby boomers. Life expectancy in the US is 78.18 years for males and 82.65 for females. But these are averages. It turns out that the older you get, the longer you can expect to live. So if you are 65 and older, you can add a few years to that, and that is because you've survived the hazards of infancy and childhood and being a teenager and being a wild young adult. So that is good news. What is not such good news is Alzheimer's disease. We have 6.5 million seniors with Alzheimer's disease. And of course, some people get it before they are seniors. And there are a lot of other sources of dementia, Lewy body dementia, other sources. So there are many, many people with dementia. And the possibility of that is a very good reason to do some planning in advance. I also wanted to know if I'm in good company not having children. And the answer is yes. In 2018, 15.4% of women between the ages of 40 and 50 had not had children. And of course, if you don't have children, or you don't have children who will help you, that is another good reason to do some planning. So let's talk about finances. People are not that financially well prepared for retirement in this country. So 33% of baby boomers have less than $25,000 in retirement savings. And 25% of adults have no retirement savings at all. And this is very problematic because it's expensive to be retired. And I'm not talking just about cruises and fancy cars. Even medical care can be extremely costly. So the experts say that a couple that is 65 years old today and is going to live to their full life expectancy can expect to pay as much as $295,000 over the rest of their lives for medical care alone. And that is because even if you have Medicare and good supplemental insurance, you still have deductibles and copays and coinsurance and medication that is extremely expensive that insurance is not that helpful with, and a lot of things that are not covered by insurance: dental care, vision care, prolonged psychotherapy, hearing aids, which can be thousands and thousands of dollars. Though I am told that the over-the-counter hearing aids they now sell at CVS or wherever are pretty good, and they only cost a few $100s. Now, if you need long-term care, that is beyond the $295,000. That is not covered by regular health insurance, and it can be astronomically expensive. So I did some research for Ohio, which is where I live, and I bet it's more expensive here for some reason. Nursing homes in Ohio, $98,500 per year for a private room, $87,600 per year for a semi-private room, which means it's not private at all. You have a roommate right there. Assisted living, $55,600 per year. In-home care, on average in Ohio, $24 per hour, and that adds up really quickly. So really important for people to save however they can, take advantage of employer support such as 401ks, 403bs, and so on. And the experts say that if you have to make a choice between helping a child or grandchild with schooling, with college or graduate school, and saving for retirement, if you cannot do both, you have to pick, you should pick saving for retirement, because there are good student loan programs that students can get. There are even some loan forgiveness programs. There is no loan program for retirement, and your loved ones will appreciate not having to support you financially as you get older. Now, there are some options. There is long-term care insurance, but you really need good advice about that. It is not a good choice for everyone. There are very high premiums often. If you don't need long-term care, you've spent all that money, you don't get anything back. I'm told they fight with you a lot about whether they need to pay. You know, they'll say, no, you still could have done all of your activities of daily living. You didn't have two that you absolutely couldn't do. So people have some difficulty with long-term care insurance. It does work well for some people, but you need to go see a financial advisor and figure out if it's a good choice for you. There also are reverse mortgages. I see actors advertising that on TV sometimes. They say it's the answer to all your prayers. It's not. It has a lot of shortcomings. So you need good advice about that. Don't just go out and get it because Henry Winkler or somebody said to. All right, I think I'm going to switch to legal documents now. So we said a lot of people are not financially prepared for retirement. How are we doing with legal preparedness? And the answer is not so well. So only 46% of U.S. adults have wills, and even among seniors, the number is only 75%. And I have been surprised by people who are older, who have serious health problems, who are highly educated, who ask me, do I need to bother with a will? And the answer is probably yes. If you don't have a will, state law will govern how your assets are distributed, and they will go to your children and your spouse. But if there are other things that you want to do with your money, you need those instructions in a will. So you might want to leave some money to other loved ones. You might want to leave some to charity, perhaps to your synagogue. And so you do need those kinds of instructions in a will. So it's a good idea to go and talk to an elder law attorney or a wills and estates attorney, and they can give you good advice about wills. For some people, it's appropriate to have a trust, not for everyone. And often attorneys will give you a package deal for the will and all the other documents I'll discuss in a minute for a reasonable price. Now, one reason to get a trust is so you don't have to go through probate. You don't have to have the executor of your estate go to court and get a judge involved. A lot of people say it's not such a problem to do that. It's not that burdensome. But if you don't want that to happen, there's another technique called payment or transfer on death. How many people have heard of that? Okay, some people have. Great. So that is where you designate particular assets to go to particular people after you die. And you fill out a form, and it happens. You don't have to go to court. You don't have to go through probate. So you might say the car goes to one person, the house to another, your bank accounts to a third. So what you have to do is go to the right place and ask for the form. So the Department of Motor Vehicles for the car, the deed people downtown for the house, the bank for the bank accounts, your financial advisor for other investments. And you fill out the form. It is not too cumbersome. It is well worth the effort. So something to think about. So far we've talked about what happens to your assets after you die. But the truth is that because of dementia or another injury, you may need some help with your financial affairs long before you die. And so it's really important to have a durable power of attorney for property and finance. This is a decision maker who will write checks for you, manage your financial affairs, make decisions about investments and charitable contributions and so on, act in your place if you cannot manage those matters on your own. So it should be somebody that you trust, that you're willing to be open with about your assets and where they can find important documents and who your financial advisor is and so on. And not only one decision maker, you need an alternate also, because the original person that you named might herself be incapacitated or just unavailable when the time comes. And the importance of having a decision maker who is well aware of your financial matters was demonstrated to me by the story of a colleague at work. So her parents were aging in place. The mother had dementia. The father was a very independent and private man. And the adult children tried to have the conversations. They came to him and said, "Dad, can you please tell us something about how we might help you if something happens and you're not able to make your own decisions or manage your own affairs?" And the father got angry. And he said, "Leave me alone. You're trying to get your hands on my money. It's none of your business. I'm fully in control." And one day there was a catastrophic fire in the house. The house burnt to ashes, the computer melted, the paperwork was gone. The mother escaped, but she had dementia, didn't know anything about financial affairs. The father died of his wounds. And the adult children had no idea what insurance policies were there, what bank accounts, how can they pay for the care their mother now needs. It took them about a year to straighten that all out, and that is on top of the terrible tragedy of the fire and the father's death. So you want to make sure that does not happen to you or to your loved ones. You must have those conversations. I also say provide funeral instructions. So a lot of people tell me, "I don't want to burden my children. I'll be gone. I don't really care what they do. Let them do whatever they want." That is not really a kindness. When a parent dies, it's a very stressful time. Hopefully your children are really upset that you're gone, right? The last thing they want is to do all the work from scratch of figuring out what you would have wanted, what's respectful, what honors you, what dishonors you. The more instructions you give, the more they'll appreciate it. They'll know exactly what to do and not have to worry about it. So you not only need a decision maker for financial affairs, you also need a decision maker for health care, because you might not be able to make your own health care decisions for a long time before you die. And so again, you need a decision maker and an alternate, and you should be open with those people and trust them. Trust that they will carry out your wishes, even if they would have made different decisions for themselves. So you need to talk to them about your preferences. Do you want to prolong life at all costs? Do you want to emphasize quality of life. If you have dementia, would you want aggressive chemotherapy? Now, you can list some things in a document called a living will. This applies just to the very end of life. So it's, would you want a ventilator, artificial nutrition and hydration, dialysis at the very end of life? So it's a good thing to have. It usually comes with the durable power of attorney for healthcare, but it's even more important to have a decision maker, because the decision maker can make decisions for as long as necessary. So you want to make sure that you give copies of your documents to everyone that might need them, to your decision makers, to your physician, to the hospital. When you go to the hospital, you should carry your healthcare documents with you. To your attorney, assuming that you're going to use an attorney, they will have a copy, because you don't want a fire to happen and everything to be gone and nobody to know what to do. Now, the durable power of attorney documents, they are found on the internet, and some senior organizations have them. That's okay. The will, you really need to talk to an attorney about, because that is not boilerplate. Also, some people say, you know, I have 3 kids, I'm going to make them all joint decision makers. Is that a good idea? Terrible. Because chances are that there's going to be something they disagree about. And if it's something important, that can tear families apart, and it can cause chaos at the hospital. I sit on the ethics committee at university hospitals, and we're constantly talking about situations where adult children disagree and are fighting in the hallway in front of the healthcare providers, and it's an emergency, and the healthcare providers can't do anything. So figure out who your decision maker is, appoint one decision maker, appoint an alternate, let everybody know who that is. It's the person that you think will do the best job, and so be it. And I gave this talk last week, and I've always said, you know, the financial decision maker can be different from the healthcare decision maker. You know, if different relatives have different strengths, that's okay. But another speaker said she had a situation where the financial decision maker hated the brother that was the healthcare decision maker and wouldn't pay for any of the healthcare that the healthcare decision maker said was needed. So it can be a mess. Make sure that you avoid that if possible. And finally, with respect to legal documents, you don't want to write them once and leave them for 30 years and never revisit them, because things change. When I finished the 2nd edition, I told my husband, you know, we better practice what I preach. Let's go to the attorney. And we were surprised by how many things changed that we needed to update. So they say update upon the 3 Ds, right? Update when you turn a new decade, happy birthday, go to the attorney. Upon the death of somebody that you were going to leave money to, or a decision maker. Upon divorce, you may not want your ex as your decision maker anymore. Upon a new diagnosis that might change your trajectory, or again, the trajectory of a decision maker. And upon decline, your decline or a decision maker's decline. So you might not have to change anything, but please take it out of the drawer and take a look at it and make sure it's fully updated. All right, our last topic, medical care. So I think most people, if not all people, want to feel good and keep going for their entire life, and then, you know, die in their sleep or drop dead somewhere without knowing what's going on. And so I sent a research assistant to figure out how often that happens. And she came back with pretty bad news. So only 7 to 15% of people die what is called a sudden death. That is a death that is not explained by anything in the medical record. No cancer, no heart failure. It's just pretty much a surprise. And so most of us go through some period of decline and illness, and 70% of seniors have 2 or more chronic conditions. Often it's many more than 2. And so what we do is we run to see specialists, and specialists can give you excellent care. But there could be a problem if your care is not coordinated, if there's nobody overseeing the whole picture, because your care can become fragmented. Every specialist aggressively treats the condition they're in charge of without thinking about other conditions or your overall welfare. And that was demonstrated to me by my mother. So about 2 years before she died, she went seemingly overnight from being a cognitively intact person to being as though she was at the end stage of Alzheimer's. She stopped communicating, she didn't want to eat, she slept most of the time, and when she was awake, she sat in front of the television with a blank stare. And we were completely baffled. We could not understand what was happening. And it turned out that what happened was she had been on 12 drugs. What an 82-year-old who weighs 105 pounds is doing on 12 drugs, I don't know, but that's what it was. And some doctor added a 13th. And it was a very unlucky 13. It robbed her of all of her cognitive capacities. And so we started arguing with the doctors, and slowly but surely medications were taken away, and we got her down to 5 instead of 13, and she did regain her cognitive capacity. But there were 2 months between April and June of 2011 that she completely did not remember. We would tell her stories about what happened and how she behaved, and she would say, "You're not telling the truth. It can't be me. I have zero recollection of that." And I have since heard and read similar anecdotes. It's not that unusual, apparently. So you want to make sure that does not happen to you or your loved ones. And so how can you get that care coordination? Well, a good geriatrician is a terrific idea. But we have a terrible shortage of geriatricians. The statistics I have is that there are only 7,000 geriatricians for 56 million seniors in this country, and only about half of them work full-time in geriatrics. And so they say we need 27,000 new geriatricians by 2025. Well, that is not going to happen. How many people know med students who say, "I want to go into geriatrics"? All the ones I know want to go into dermatology. Right? Acne, Botox, it's not that stressful. Good money, set hours, no emergencies. Geriatrics is really stressful. Money is less. And so they don't want that. So who else can do care coordination? A good primary care physician. But we have a terrible shortage of primary care physicians and internists and family practitioners. And so what's the average appointment time? How many minutes do you have with a primary care physician on average? Anybody know? 15 minutes. And half the time they're fiddling with the computer nowadays, right? So they also don't really have time at every visit to go through your whole medication list and listen to everything that's happening with you and do all the care coordination that you need. And so it's very, very important that you become an active member of your own medical team. So educate yourself, or make sure you're helping to educate your loved ones. Do some reading. Talk to other people with similar conditions. Join support groups. And you can read on the internet. There's tons of garbage on the internet, but there are wonderful resources as well. I have gotten great information from the websites of the Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, National Institutes of Health, CDC. Now, don't panic. Don't decide you're dying of a brain tumor because of something you read on the internet, but use it to educate yourself and to prepare yourself for going to the doctor, for deciding if you need to go to the doctor. And if you need to go to the doctor, call and make an appointment, even if you don't have a regularly scheduled appointment. And if you think you need a follow-up appointment, call and make one. They don't offer them that often because there is such a shortage. And most importantly, go to the doctor and be equipped with questions that you want answered and make sure they take the time to answer them. And so again, the importance of this was demonstrated to me in my own life by an encounter with my husband. So as I said, he has Parkinson's disease, and we have seen a lot of neurologists. And neurologists like to offer drug cocktails to Parkinson's patients. And so we were at one neurologist, and he said, try this drug, you'll love it. And I was listening, and I noticed he wasn't really talking about side effects. So I said, what about side effects? And he said, don't worry, most people tolerate this beautifully. But I'm a law professor, so I heard most. So I said, how about those that don't? And he hemmed and he hawed, and finally he acknowledged that 1 in 5 patients, 20%, find that it sort of clouds their mind and causes some confusion and they can't think clearly. Well, Andy is still teaching at Case Western Reserve University in computer science, so the last thing we needed is for his mind to be clouded. So we said no thanks, but we wouldn't have known that if I hadn't asked the question. So the next appointment, Andy went by himself because I had to teach or I had some other conflict. And he came home and I said, how was the appointment? And he said, it was actually really good. The doctor was in a really good mood. And I said, why? And he said, because you weren't there to bug him. But nevertheless, it is really important to ask the questions and to involve a trusted advocate. So don't go to important medical appointments by yourself. Don't go for procedures by yourself. Don't go to the hospital by yourself. The patient is often nervous, maybe not so willing to ask questions. It's really important to have someone who can listen to what the doctor said, take notes, ask the questions, talk to the patient afterwards about what happened during the encounter. And people say, I don't want to burden others. It's not fun to spend a day at the hospital or a clinic or a doctor's office. But you will have plenty of opportunities to reciprocate. If you ask someone for a favor, they'll feel comfortable asking you for a favor. And you'll be able to go with them. And again, I learned this in my own life. When I was 29, I became extremely ill and I needed emergency surgery. I was living in Houston. My parents were living in East Lansing, Michigan. And so my mother had to come for a few weeks to take care of me. And it disrupted her life, but she was my mother. She did it. Well, 5 months later, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I don't even remember a discussion about this. I remember an announcement that she was not going to be cared for in East Lansing, Michigan. She was going to be cared for in Houston, Texas, where I conveniently lived and where there's the wonderful MD Anderson Cancer Center. And so I was single. She moved into my 1-bedroom apartment for what turned out to be 9 months. She had surgery and chemo and radiation and everything. And I was extremely nervous about this arrangement. But it turned out to be a wonderful period of time for us. We became much, much closer than we ever had been. So I had an immediate opportunity to reciprocate, but everybody does in one way or another. And so finally, just have those conversations. It's so important to have conversations with your loved ones about what you would want if you can't make your own decisions, about what they would want, about how you can help them. It's extremely important, extremely difficult to make good decisions during a crisis if you don't know anything about the challenges that you're facing, and if you have not had the conversations with the people that you needed to talk to. So I hope the talk was helpful. I hope the book is even more helpful. It will be sold outside. It's also available on Amazon if you want to recommend it to others. And I think we will now do Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you so much. A lot for us to think about, and I know hopefully nobody's feeling panicked, but I know that there are always things for us to think about and to do and follow up on, and so there is in this, not just in this room, but in general, we can be that community of support, as I said earlier, and accountability and a sharing of resources of where do you go to find X, Y, and Z, and I know that I can tell you that that the book itself is going to be really helpful and not overwhelming, hopefully.
It's thin.
It's thin,
right?
but it's also really when Dr. Hoffman talks about the conclusion of each chapter really having the checklist, it's incredibly helpful. And also a reminder through the sharing of your stories, your family stories, your personal stories, are reminders we each have those in slightly different ways. And a reminder that none of us are not going to deal in some ways with the realities of aging and of having family members age. And there are lots of different ways that people have done this and navigated this successfully, with bumps in the road and places that we can help pick each other up and support each other. So I just wanted to put all of that out there, and actually we'll go to some questions.
Thank you very much for a very well-organized talk. I'm looking forward to your book. I have a question and a comment. So the comment first is, there are now medical concierges, not just concierge care medicine, but people who will come and go with your loved one to, sorry, I get a little tripped up, medical visits. It's very helpful. Oh, thanks. Which leads to my question, which is, what do you do when you have a loved one, in my case an aunt, although I'm not looking for personal advice, who adamantly will not address any of the issues that are listed? Her retirement plan is to just stick her head in the sand. And I'm sure all of us have family members that are very similar to that. So I'm just curious your advice on having these conversations.
Right, so that is very, very tough. Keep having the conversations. One tactic, maybe less effective with an aunt, but with parents, is to say, do this for me. I am so stressed about this. It's making me miserable. Please, out of kindness, as my mother or my father, please do some of these things, or talk to me so I can do them for you. And I had exactly the same question a few months ago. I gave a talk at a library in Cleveland, and there was a middle-aged woman there who was saying exactly the same thing. And I kept saying, did you say to your mother that this is for you, that you really need this to happen? She said, I've said this, I've tried everything. And finally, a woman next to her, an older woman, raised her hand, and I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, all right, I'm the mother. She dragged me to this talk. And she said, after hearing the fire story, now I'm going to talk to her. So maybe the fire story is helpful. I don't know. But it's very challenging, and a lot of members of the older generation feel that way. But just communicating that there are things to do, and that it's really important to you, if not to her, to do them might be helpful.
I will also share that there have been times, I'm not volunteering this for all of our clergy, but there have been times that when there's been a relationship, and sometimes even in the introduction to a family member, that we've had people ask for us to have some of those difficult conversations, because when it's so personal, I think it can be challenging, because certainly when we talk about also aging with dignity and wanting that independence, it can be really, really difficult. And so there have been a few times that we've been called upon to talk about things like driving, and when the conversation was just not going to happen or be shut down, and bringing it in as a way that we could help as a resource in a pastoral way, and really as a providing support to both the parent and the child. I'm curious if there's anything that, as you, because this is the second edition, things that you learned along the way that you might have done differently, or maybe that changed from the first edition to this one. Just anything that you learned that if you went back, you might have approached differently.
I don't think I would have approached things differently because the issues are the same, 2015 to 2022. This has more stories because by giving these talks, I learn more stories. There are some things that have changed in the law. I updated all of the resources. The old book was 2013, 2012 resources, so these are all this decade. But I can't think of anything that has radically changed, though there are some more services, Go Grandparent and some of the services that are helpful for medical care. So that's all added in.
Was there anything that you hesitated to share in the book? Because again, very personal family stories, and then anything that you're really proud or happy that you were able to share, and or that you have begun sharing as you've gone around and given these talks.
Right. So to be honest, some of the people that I say are acquaintances are really my relatives. And I would have probably shared everything, but I have 3 younger sisters who are not as happy about me running around the country telling stories about our parents. So there's more of that as we got more distance from their deaths, but still, some are anonymized, and now only that it's really my family. So
I want to see, number of questions. Okay, great. 1, 2.
Hi, thank you very much. Very informative. So I know this will vary depending on state, but what about debts after death, both personal and business debts? If someone's plan is, well, when I die, I don't owe the money anymore and no one else will. So how does that get treated?
yeah, they are paid out of your estate. So, right, you won't have to worry about it if you're not alive anymore, but if you thought your kids will inherit or somebody else will inherit, the people you owe money to will take precedence. They will get the money.
What about like business debts, like for a sole proprietorship?
Yeah, I am not that kind of attorney, so I don't want to represent. I think it depends on the business arrangement, but if somebody has debts, they really need to talk to an attorney and have a will and so on and figure out what's going to happen to the debts, because it can get very, very complicated for the executor of the estate. But I don't think debts just magically disappear if you die.
2 things. When you use the term geriatrician, are you talking about MDs?
Yes.
Okay, that's the only part of that, not psychologists or...
There is a medical specialty called geriatrics, and I was referring to that. And they specifically work with older patients on care coordination.
Right, and the other thing was, I don't know if you're aware of this, and I can only speak to what's going on here. Recently, I had 2 of my doctors cut me off because they're not taking Medicare patients anymore. And I'm very nervous that this might be a trend.
Yeah, so doctors don't have to take Medicare, but they lose a lot of financial support. And, if you want patients who are 65 and older, who are the more lucrative patients because they have a lot of problems, you have to take Medicare. So I don't think it's going to be a trend that sweeps the country, but I do know of some doctors that don't want to deal with the paperwork, don't want to deal with the burdens of,
I'm not referring to new patients.
yeah.
I'm referring to existing patients.
Yes, so physicians are, if they give you an opportunity to find care that you need elsewhere, they are allowed to let you go, to say, I don't want this kind of patient anymore. It's sad, but, you know, they also have some autonomy and are able to choose what they want to work with and what they don't want to work with professionally.
Hi, I'm sure this is not a new question, but suggestions for daughters-in-law of families with only sons, multiple sons, but no daughters, to kind of help the parents, and with, you know, obstinate parents, grandparents, that sort of thing. So kind of in your travels, any sort of suggestions on how daughters-in-law can help to facilitate that relationship and have those conversations?
Just take, you know, it depends on the relationship with the parent, but if you are close to the parent, you can certainly initiate those conversations or ask the husband to participate, say, you know, I'll take the lead, I've read the book, but you need to come with me because I'm not sure she'll be comfortable with just me alone. And I did have that with my husband's mother, who was 93 and had been widowed before he was born and was super independent and didn't want to tell us anything about her finances. And my husband, you know, didn't want to deal with it. And so I tried a little bit. It wasn't terribly successful, but she did show me the little file box where she had some documents in the closet. So at least we knew that. But, you know, I don't think it's any different necessarily if you have a good relationship with the parent, and, you know, just asking the husband to at least sit there so she feels more comfortable might be a good approach.
Do you have a good guideline for like a death binder?
For a death
A death
binder?
binder. It's like to have for your family to know exactly what to do.
Right. You know, just
In your book?
in the book. I mean, it's just a matter of gathering all of the documents and all of the information, and I have that since my husband's has Parkinson's. I've written out, you know, if I can't make decisions, if I'm injured or something, here's the electric company, here's, you know, because he doesn't do any of the bills. So here's the financial advisor, here's the electric company, here are the things that are automated. So nowadays, a lot of things are automated, so people need to know these bills are automated. And just try to figure out, you know, if I disappear tomorrow, or if you're talking about a parent, if my parent disappears tomorrow, what are all the things that we need to do? And have it, you know, you don't even need a binder. You can just have it obviously electronically. I do get questions about passwords, and that is huge, because now if you don't know the passwords, you can't operate at all. So there are services where you can have one big password. I haven't done this, but one big password, and then you get, if you know that, it will give you all the other passwords. It's a big, complicated password, but that's all you need, because a lot of people can't remember more than one. And I just read that Google and so on are going to switch from passwords to face recognitions or, you know, thumbprints. I don't know what you do if you're the decision maker for someone. I guess you could put the computer up to their face, but so yeah, I mean, it is.
If they have it set up for facial recognition.
Yes, yes. It is a complicated issue.
Yep.
One of the things, I have a question, but just following on the passwords with my father, the security questions, what was the name of his dog as a child, was not something that I knew, and so understanding those things is really helpful. And also, if you don't, I did have some handle on his affairs, but not, one of the things was he had a lot of files, and he never, like most of us, didn't ever clean them out, so I didn't know what accounts were no longer active. And I would highly recommend getting the latest tax returns, because that will show you what is the most recent thing that's still active. My question is now with my mother, is around this question that came up before, is the sensitivity. She's very open to talking with me, but it's still really hard, even for myself as I age, to accept the aging, and hard for her as well. So I'm curious, maybe more coming out of the stories, like the woman who was, shocked by the fire story. If there are things that you're finding in your travels and the anecdotes that you hear about, from the perspective of the older person, what kind of messages resonate with them to be open, or what kind of approaches resonate? Like we took a trip, and so we talked about some things in the car because we had about 5 hours to fill and we had a long time. Are there things that you've heard about that seem to kind of be more effective strategies for, for getting the people to open up, or to have those, be willing to have those conversations?
I mean, some older people are more willing if the adult child explains, you're doing this for me. This is a parenting duty, a final parenting duty. I know you want to be private and autonomous, and I'm not going to interfere with that, but the reality is that there may come a time when you're not going to, and just put yourself in my shoes. Imagine how hard it's going to be and how heart-wrenching it's going to be for me if I just don't know anything about your finances or how to proceed or how to help you. So I really need to know what your preferences are medically, and I really need to know about your financial affairs. And sometimes, if they have a good financial advisor, just knowing who the financial advisor is will give you a lot of information. So they don't necessarily have to spill everything about every account they have, but you need just some way to help them and take over if something happens. And, now with the shootings you can bring that up. I don't think you'll get dementia. You're so clear-minded, but you could be at the mall and something terrible could happen. And how will I know what to do?
As a child, how do I handle the fact that I think that my mother has made the wrong decision as far as her living arrangements? 15 years ago, we told her, you got to move out of your townhouse. What 80-year-old's going to want stairs? Well, she's now approaching 80, and her mortgage is paid off, and she has no intention of moving. My in-laws are even older, and they really should be in a retirement home, and they've gone to look, but it's too small. They're finding things wrong with everything. So, they're still all of sound mind and everything, but we really believe that they're making the wrong decision by staying where they are.
Right, so that happens with a lot of people, and people tell me, I was thinking of moving, but my financial advisor told me absolutely not. So sometimes there are other pressures, well, you paid it off, don't you dare move, it will wreck you financially. I mean, there are things to do, so you can, put accommodations in your home, grab bars, you can put a chairlift in on the stairs. So if they really won't move, you want to make sure those kinds of things at least happen. And then, they're just all stubborn. Right. So again, look, if something happens to you, I'm going to be stuck with it, and I'm not going to know what to do. And sometimes just going to a few retirement communities that are nice, maybe that will inspire them, where it's not all people with dementia and people with mobility problems. They can see, oh, it might be a nice community where they can make friends. They're worried about making friends. They're worried about the food being good. So a lot of the communities will actually allow you to stay there for a day or two. They have an apartment where prospective residents can live. So that might be an approach. But otherwise, at least put in some safety measures so that there's less chance of falling.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions, and then we'll have a chance for people to purchase books, ask some questions as we do so, and we have the resource handout as well. Your bag is here.
Oh,
So
wow,
we'll be able to do that.
wonderful, okay.
This is just a suggestion for people whose parents are unwilling or reticent to talk. I have the opposite. My parents, we've been talking about this for an uncomfortably long amount of time. But one of the things my mom forced on us was she invited my sister and I to come for a weekend to go through the stuff, and we were dreading it. And we started with photographs, and it led to a ton of discussions and fun stories, and it was easy and fun and only took us a few hours. And so then when the next iteration came around, it wasn't as scary. I think my mom was looking forward to it because it's a chance to share some of the story. We went through some of the stuff and this was your great grandma's china or whatever. And so it gave those things meaning to us, but it also was less threatening or upsetting for her. And it led to a lot of those bigger discussions in a less scary way.
Right, there is the opposite. There are people who, when you're 10, they'll start saying, you're going to take care of me when I'm old, and, start working towards that, so.
My grandmother, who lived to 99 and a half, when she was, I want to say about 80, started talking about what, we all, every time we were there, and I grew up in the same town, but I had cousins from California. Anytime someone was in, we had to walk around with Post-its. Well, it eventually was Post-its. I don't think they were Post-its initially, but so people could mark. She wanted to make sure that everybody got things that were meaningful to them and that it was fair, so that she didn't want anyone arguing after the fact. And there were decisions and conversations about among her children and her children's children who was going to get what, so that it was even and fair. Which then led to when my parents downsized and moved to Vermont, which is a whole other story because it's far, and some of us have parents who live far away. I want to just share something that they've done, but before I get to that, they decided they were going to take care of all the culling of things then, so that we didn't have to do it later. And which also led to my dad sending me a whole bunch of papers in boxes that are sitting on a cart in the back of the sanctuary, because we have a library at Washington Hebrew, so you get a library rate. So he sent all the papers here, so it's good they're not cluttering up my house, but I still have to go through them. Again, for parents who are not near children, one of the things that they did is with some other friends, they formed an informal Friends Helping Friends group, and did some research into what exists in different places around the country. And with some people they knew in the community, they started talking about what are the issues, what are the things that we're concerned about or that our children may have to deal with. What happens if we're not near our children? Let's make sure that people here have our children's information so they can get in touch with them. What happens if someone has to go to the hospital and there's a pet, or just all the different questions and things that we might not think about. And they're having those tough conversations with their friends in the community, and then sharing with all of us their children's information as well. And the other thing is that one of the things you talk about is that importance of community, and really keeping people engaged and active, and what a difference that can make, and having that social network. I know, we've talked about there are times that there are people. I was just talking with someone who's not in the room right now, but this morning, who was sharing that her grandmother has not left her condo in 4 years, and she really doesn't have that social engagement. So thinking about how we do some of that, and how we can think about that here and share and do some more sharing of what is going to be supportive and helpful. So already Jen Millstone and I are thinking about ways that we can provide that support within our community, continue this conversation, and find ways that we can set up networks of support within Washington Hebrew and within the community, and to continue the conversation as we go forward. So I want to thank Dr. Hoffman for being with us today, and also for sharing, and really encourage you to purchase her book, because I think it'll be a helpful resource as we move this conversation forward and continue it. And thankful again to the Jewish Book Council for providing this opportunity. So thank you so much.